What happens when a music icon steps onto a morning show, expecting a warm, celebratory conversation, and instead walks straight into a line of questions she never agreed to entertain? Faith Hill's appearance on CBS Mornings was intended to be light, joyful, a reflection on her legendary career, and a preview of her new creative chapter. But what began as friendly banter quickly unraveled into one of the most uncomfortable on-air confrontations morning television has seen in years. The warmth of the opening moments evaporated, replaced by sharp exchanges and a tension so thick the entire studio seemed to shrink around it. Faith arrived with her signature radiance, greeting Gayle King and Nate Burleson with an easy smile, chatting about the early hour and the thrill of being back in New York. Gayle opened with a gentle, questing about Faith's new music, her inspiration. Her renewed sense of artistic freedom, and Faith responded gracefully, describing the joy of rediscovering her voice after years of working at a relentless pace. The atmosphere was relaxed, predictable, exactly what viewers expect from early morning interviews. Then Nate leaned forward, and the tone shifted. His expression carried that unmistakable signal: seasoned. Performers recognized instantly the unspoken warning that the soft questions were over. He praised her longevity and resilience, but beneath the compliments was a sharper edge. Without warning, he pivoted, asking whether she found it difficult to stay relevant in a music industry that had evolved far beyond the country sound that defined her rise. The question hit with an audible weight. Faith's smile faltered for a fraction of a second as she recalibrated, unsure if Nate was genuinely curious or trying to provoke. She answered with practiced grace, explaining that she had never chased trends and that her connection with her audience was rooted in authenticity, not chart positions. But Nate pressed further, suggesting that younger artists weren't just taking up space in the genre, but making her style of music feel outdated, almost a relic. That was the moment everything shifted. Faith straightened, her hands folding neatly in her lap, her expression controlled but unmistakably firmer. She refuted the idea that her music was a relic, reminding him that millions still connected deeply with her work, and that legacy itself was a form of relevance. It was a poised, confident answer, yet the rising tension in the studio was impossible to ignore. Gayle King, recognizing the temperature spike, attempted to redirect by steering the conversation toward Faith's family, her marriage, and the ways she balanced personal life with a demanding career. The change in topic brought a momentary ease. Faith relaxed, lit up as she talked about her husband, her children, the ranch, and the simple, grounding pleasures of life away from the spotlight. For a moment, it seemed the storm had passed, that the interview had found its rhythm again and could wrap on a graceful note. But Nate wasn't finished. He waited until Faith completed her thought, allowed a brief, deceptively calm silence to fill the air, and then prepared to steer the conversation back into territory far more volatile. And then he came back with another question, one that instantly made everyone in the studio tense up all over again. Nate brought up the long-circulating rumors about tension in Faith Hill's marriage, asking whether the public's image of the perfect country couple actually matched the private reality. He framed it as innocent curiosity, insisting that people admired her relationship and simply wanted to know how she and her husband had managed to stay together for so long in an industry where marriages seemed to crumble constantly. But the gentle framing did nothing to soften the fact that the question was invasive. Faith's eyes narrowed. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she let the silence stretch long enough to feel deliberate, pointed, and charged. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady but unmistakably firm. She told Nate that her marriage was not a rumor to be dissected on morning television, that what she shared with her husband was private, and that she had never treated her personal life as a commodity for the public to consume. Nate immediately tried to backpedal, insisting he meant no disrespect, and that he was only acknowledging the admiration fans had for her relationship. But Faith cut him off not rudely, but decisively. Admiration, she said, did not entitle anyone to details. Respect meant understanding boundaries. She had come on the show to talk about her work, not to be interrogated about her personal life. Gail stepped in again, her voice warm and soothing as she attempted to steer the conversation back toward Faith's upcoming projects. But the damage was done. The atmosphere had shifted from uncomfortable to openly hostile, and Faith was no longer trying to hide her frustration. Nate, whether out of stubbornness or a misplaced sense of journalistic duty, pressed forward. He brought up a recent interview in which another artist accused older country musicians of being unsupportive of new voices of gatekeeping the industry and making it harder for diverse talent to break through. He asked Faith directly whether she believed there was truth to that criticism and whether she had ever reflected on her own role within an industry that had long been slow to embrace change. It was a loaded question, one that subtly accused her of complicity in systemic problems without ever saying it outright. Faith stared at him, and for a moment it seemed she might stand up and walk out right then and there. But instead, she answered. She told Nate it was interesting he wanted to talk about gatekeeping and barriers, while simultaneously using his platform to put her on the defensive rather than celebrating her contributions. If he wanted to have a real conversation about the challenges in the music industry, she said, they could absolutely do that. But ambushing a guest with accusations disguised as questions was not journalism, it was performance. She reminded him that she had spent her entire career supporting up-and-coming artists, mentoring younger singers, and using her influence to open doors whenever she could. Reducing her decades of work to a question of whether she had done enough was not only unfair, it was deeply disrespectful. Gail looked stricken, mortified by how far off the rails the interview had gone. Nate looked torn between doubling down or backing off entirely, his expression flickering between defiance and something that might have been regret. Faith didn't wait for him to choose. She rose calmly, removed her microphone, and set it on the table in front of her. She thanked Gail for the invitation, said she appreciated the opportunity, but that she would not sit there and be treated like a target. Then she looked at Nate and told him that if he wanted to ask tough questions, he could start by making sure they were fair. And with that, she walked off the set. The cameras lingered for a few seconds, capturing the stunned faces of the remaining hosts and the thick silence no one seemed to know how to break. Gail finally called for a commercial break, her voice tight and the feed cut away, though the damage was already done. Within minutes, clips of the confrontation were spreading online, with viewers weighing in on who crossed the line, whether Faith had overreacted or whether Nate had pushed too far. The debate was instant, intense, and it was clear nothing about this moment was going to simply blow over. Backstage, the tension was electric. Faith hadn't left the building. She was in a green room surrounded by her team. Her publicist was already on the phone doing damage control. Her manager paced anxiously, trying to figure out how to spin what had unfolded on live television. Faith sat quietly among them, arms crossed, her expression unreadable. She was not impulsive by nature, and even though she had walked off that set, she was clearly still processing everything that had happened, weighing her options and considering her next move. Meanwhile, back on set, the commercial break was ending, and Gail and Nate had to figure out how to move forward. When the cameras came back on, Gail took the lead. Her tone was professional but visibly strained as she acknowledged that the interview with Faith Hill had taken an unexpected turn, that the conversation had grown heated, and that Faith had chosen to step away. She didn't assign blame or take sides. She didn't imply who was right or wrong. Gail simply laid out the facts as they had happened, her voice steady even though the tension was still vibrating through the studio. Beside her, Nate looked noticeably different from the confident interviewer who had opened the segment. His shoulders were tighter, his jaw more set. And when Gail finally invited him to speak, he chose his words with deliberate caution. He insisted that his questions had been fair, that his responsibility as a journalist was to go deeper than polite conversation. He said he respected Faith Hill and hadn't intended to offend her, but he stood by the questions he asked. It was a measured response, but immediately the public wasn't buying it. *online, the reaction was explosive. Hashtags trended within minutes. Viewers were already analyzing every grimace, every pause, every sharp inhale. One half praised Nate for pushing boundaries for refusing to offer celebrities softball interviews. The other half accused him of crossing a line, of blindsiding a guest who had shown up in good faith, of prioritizing drama over substance. Clips of the moment spread like wildfire, each one sharpening the divide. Meanwhile, Faith's supporters celebrated her refusal to tolerate invasive questioning. While critics claimed she had overreacted and behaved unprofessionally by walking off set. The debate was intense, emotional, and growing louder by the minute. In the green room. Faith wasn't scrolling through reactions or listening to the chaos unfolding outside. She sat quietly, arms crossed, her expression unreadable as her team moved frantically around her. Her publicist urged her to leave the building immediately and release a carefully worded statement later. Her manager argued for a demand an official apology from the network. But Faith wasn't persuaded by either approach. She'd spent decades navigating interviews, some respectful, some painfully invasive, and she knew the difference between a difficult question and a question meant to provoke. The more she replayed the exchange in her mind, the sharper her irritation became. She realized she didn't want to retreat. She wanted clarity. She wanted her voice back. And she wanted to say what needed to be said on camera, not through a press release diluted by committee. Her decision was immediate and firm. She wasn't leaving. She was going back. Her publicist warned it might escalate things. Her manager said the conflict was already spiraling. But Faith didn't waver. She explained that walking off had been a moment to breathe, not an escape. Now that she had collected herself, she intended to return to the set and finish the conversation on her own terms. After a tense silence, her team relented. Within minutes, producers were rushing to rearrange the rundown. They had assumed Faith was gone for good. Instead, she was coming backhand. She wasn't coming quietly. Gail was informed first, and relief crossed her face, though apprehension followed quickly. Nate, hearing the news, stiffened. Whatever semblance of control he thought he had regained evaporated. He had expected time, maybe days, to craft a response. Instead, Faith was already on her way back to the chairs he and Gail sat in. Cameras still rolling. When Faith stepped onto the set again, everything felt different. The warmth from earlier was gone. The air was sharp, almost metallic with tension. She sat down with perfect composure, her posture unyielding. Her eyes focused squarely on Nate. Gail welcomed her back with gratitude and empathy. But Faith's small, polite acknowledgement was just a formality. Her attention was singular. She had come for resolution. She began immediately. No jokes, no soft entry. She told Nate and the millions watching that difficult questions were part of the job, and she respected that. But respect cut both ways. She walks through each of his earlier questions with calm precision, dissecting the tone, the framing, the intention behind them. She explained that suggesting her career was outdated wasn't curiosity, was judgment disguised as inquiry. She made it clear that probing into her marriage on live television was not journalism. It was a violation of personal boundaries she had every right to protect. And she addressed the accusation of gatekeeping in the industry, explaining that accusing someone of contributing to systemic issues without context or evidence was less a question and more an attack. Nate listened. Rigid and silent, his hands folded neatly in front of him. When she finished, the silence that followed was suffocating. Gail watched anxiously, unsure whether to step in or let the conversation unfold. Finally, Nate responded. His voice was calm, but his words revealed defensiveness just beneath the surface. He said he understood her perspective, but maintained that his questions were valid and important. He argued that public figures of Faith's stature should be prepared for scrutiny, that avoiding difficult topics didn't serve the audience, and that while he regretted, she felt disrespected. He could not apologize for doing his job. Faith didn't flinch, but something in her expression shifted barely but noticeably. She told him she wasn't asking for an apology for the sake of one. She was asking him to understand that scrutiny didn't require condescension, that respect didn't cancel depth. She emphasized that she had earned her place in music, that she owed no one justification for her success or her boundaries, and that if this was the standard for interviews on the show, she wanted no part of it. Then she said it. She would not be returning. Not today. Not ever. The studio froze. Gail looked stricken. Nate looked like he'd been punched. Gail tried desperately to smooth things over, appealing to their long professional relationship, insisting they could find common ground. But Faith stood firm. This wasn't about a single interview, it was about principle. She refused to participate in spaces that treated guests as props, not people. She thanked Gail for her professionalism, but made it clear that as long as the show upheld these values, she wouldn't be back. Her resolve was absolute. For the first time since the earlier confrontation, Nate looked genuinely shaken. He opened his mouth, perhaps to defend himself again, perhaps to soften his stance. And the entire studio held its breath, waiting for what would happen next. Faith lifted her hand and stopped Nate before he could even form his next sentence. Her voice was calm but final as she told him she was done, that nothing he said now would undo the choices he had made or change the decision she had already reached. This wasn't anger anymore. It was closure. She rose from her chair with quiet certainty, shook Gail's hand with genuine warmth, wished her well, and walked off the set for the second and, unmistakably, final time that morning. There was no confusion, no hesitation, no possibility of her returning. Faith Hill had ended the interview, and with it, her relationship with CBS Mornings. When the camera cut back to the hosts, the expressions said everything. Gail looked stricken, visibly shaken by how quickly and irrevocably things had collapsed. Nate, on the other hand, looked defensive, caught somewhere between doubling down and realizing, too late, that he had gone too far. The show cut to commercial, but the damage had already exploded far beyond the studio walls. Within an hour, every major entertainment outlet was running the story. Clips of Faith's walkout were everywhere, played, replayed, slowed down, dissected, debated. Body language experts weighed in, media critics gave rapid-fire commentary, and the internet's outrage machine roared to life. The narrative fractured almost instantly. To some, Faith Hill was the clear victim of an aggressive ambush, blindsided on a morning show when she had expected a standard promotional interview. To others, Nate was simply doing his job, asking real questions instead of spoon-feeding celebrities flattering fluff. The middle ground evaporated. People chose sides fast and loudly. CBS scrambled into crisis mode. Executives abandoned meetings to strategize damage control and issued a carefully neutral statement praising Faith's legacy, expressing regret about how the interview unfolded, and assigning blame to no one. It was a shapeless corporate paragraph designed to appease everyone and ultimately satisfied no one. Faith's supporters called it cowardly, a refusal to hold Nate accountable. Nate's defenders accused the network of letting him twist in the wind. The statement accomplished its only real purpose, avoiding a definitive stance. Asterisk, meanwhile, Nate faced his own storm. His social media feeds overflowed with thousands of comments, some praising him, many attacking his professionalism, accusing him of bullying a woman in a way he never would have dared with a male guest. Others defended him just as fiercely, insisting Faith had been overly sensitive and unprofessional for walking off, not once, but twice. By late afternoon, Nate released his own carefully crafted response. He reiterated his respect for Faith, acknowledged the interview was difficult, and expressed regret, but he stopped short of apologizing for anything he had actually said. It was a statement designed to soothe without conceding. Faith, in contrast, said nothing at all. Asterisk, after leaving the CBS building. She returned to her hotel and opted for silence, no press release. No social media posts, no interviews. It was a deliberate quiet, a strategic withdrawal that allowed the public to interpret the moment without interference. And interpret they did. Women who had been dismissed or cornered in professional settings saw their own experiences in Faith's refusal to shrink. Others valued Nate's toughness and believed he had upheld journalistic integrity. The situation became a cultural mirror. Everyone saw what they were predisposed to see. Asterisk, inside CBS. The internal fallout was immediate and messy. Producers argued about who approved the questions, whether Nate had gone rogue, whether someone should have intervened sooner. Some staffers championed him, insisting that morning shows needed a sharper edge and that Nate was simply trying to elevate the format. Others argued that he'd confused confrontation with insight, that he had alienated a high-profile guest without gaining any meaningful truth in return. Gail found herself trapped between conflicting loyalties, her commitment to professionalism, her frustration with how badly the interview had unraveled, and her deep concern for the show's long-term reputation. She had spent years cultivating an atmosphere of trust on set, and now she feared that trust had been compromised. Asterisk, the broader cultural conversation only expanded. People debated the purpose of morning shows, the increasing push for viral moments, and the blurry line between journalism and spectacle. Did tough questioning always equal good journalism? Did comfort equal pandering? Was it possible to hold a celebrity accountable without turning the interview into a battleground? These were questions without universal answers, evolving in real time as the fallout continued.